The history of cinema is a weird thing. It really does have some quirky bits to it. And so I'm going to talk about two movies that were released in 1958 and 1959. But there are echoes of those movies that go back as far as the 1920s. They're both non-English language films. Between them, they make one story. So the two movies themselves are part one and part two of a story. They were written and directed by one of the great movie directors of the 20th century. And they don't get enough love. They're kind of interesting stories. So this is the story of the Tiger of Eschnapur and the Indian Tomb. Two Fritz Lang movies made in the late 1950s in German language. Made in Germany and also in India. They kind of resonate with a lot of modern movies in some strange ways. If you looked on Netflix and seen a movie called RRR, which is an Indian Tollywood movie, it's from the southern part of India. It's probably one of the best action films of the year. I'm going to talk more about it when I do my best of the year. These movies kind of have some echoes of that in them. To tell the story of these films, you've got to go back to 1921. When Thea von Harbu, who was the wife of Fritz Lang at the time, was involved with the making of this exact story. These movies are the third time this story's been told in cinema. The first time was in 1921 during the Weimar Republic in Germany, and Thea von Harbu wrote the script. She was really big on Indian culture. She had a big mojo for it. In fact, after her and Fritz Lang broke up, one of her lovers was an Indian guy whose last name was Tandurkar. And so she was one of those people who was focused on someone else's culture a lot, even though she did do things like writing Frau im Mond for Fritz Lang and also Metropolis. But she really had a mojo for Indian culture. And so in 1921 there was the movie The Indian Tomb, directed by a guy called Joe May. Now hold on to that name because I'm going to tell you something funny about Joe May at the end of the video. So there was a 1921 version. It was incredibly popular, that kind of southern Asian eroticism and kind of exoticism that Western cultures are still to this very day fascinated with, was very big in the 1920s, and the Weimar Republic in Germany was well known for its licentiousness. The movie was made again in 1938 by the Nazis because the story was that popular. Of course, by this time, Fritz Lang had nicked off to America and had nothing to do with that version of it at all, though Thea von Harbu did work on it. She stayed in Germany and kind of sucked up to the Nazis somewhat, while Fritz Lang made anti-Nazi movies in Hollywood. Then, in 1958, Fritz Lang knew he was coming toward the end of his career. In fact, through most of the 1950s, he kept telling people he was a dinosaur, even though he made a lot of quality films during that period of time. So in the 1950s, a company called CCC, run by a producer called Arthur Brauner, decided they wanted to remake The Indian Tomb and the other part of the story, the Tiger of Eschnapur. And so they paid Fritz Lang some money, got him to go back to Europe from Hollywood and make this movie. So the whole production went to India and got some incredible access from one of the Maharajas of India. And they got access to palaces and the floating gardens. They got access to soldiers on horseback. They got access to lots of really great locations. And so the outdoor and location shooting these films are fantastic. Now, before I go any further, I probably should tell you what the movies are about because I've just gushed about them for 5 minutes. By the way, this Masters of Cinema series by Eureka, this version of it is pretty damn good. It's got a booklet which gave me a lot of the information about the film. Let's see. A German architect, played by Paul Hubschmidt, who is actually Swiss, is commissioned by an Indian Maharaja, played by Walter Raya, to construct a temple on his palatial grounds. After saving the life of a bewitchingly beautiful dancer, played by Deborah Paget, the hero is pulled even deeper into the classic Lang motif of man versus his fate. That's it, kind of simply. The temple dancer, his name is Sita, and before I go any further there's a lot to unpack with. There's a lot to unpack with these movies. I'll acknowledge right off the start that it's all done in brownface. There are German actors, an American actress, and a Swiss actor. And the only person playing anywhere near his own race is Paul Hubschmidt's architect, Harald, who is actually sent to India and commissioned by the Maharaja to make hospitals and to make schools on a large plot of land that he has been granted. So it's an enormous project. It's going to take years. And in the meantime, Harald is housed at the palace. And on the way to the palace, which is quite remote, Harald rescues Sita from a tiger. There's a man-eating tiger out, and he rescues her by getting a flaming branch out of a fire and waving off this tiger and saving her life. And she kind of is smitten with him, but she goes to the palace. And the Maharaja is smitten with her as well. And the Maharaja's wife, the Maharani, died a few years before. And none of the other princes and courtiers and nobles of the area want a temple dancer to be the next Maharani. So there's a lot of palace intrigue in this one. And then there forms a love triangle between the Maharaja, whose name is Chandra, Harald, and Sita. And things get kind of complex very fast. The floating palace, where a lot of the movie is filmed, is a lovely location. In fact, it was used again years later for the Roger Moore James Bond film Octopussy. It's one of the locations they have for that. Beautiful location, beautiful palaces. And in the movie's world, the palaces have a whole bunch of tunnels and caves underneath it and dungeons going back hundreds of years. And for some reason, the Maharaja has put a leprosarium in the caves beneath the palace. And so there are a lot of untreated people with Hansen's disease living like zombies underneath the palace, which is one of the reasons why the Maharaja wants to build a hospital. He wants to build a leprosarium as well. So there's lots of complexity there and lots of ways in which things can go wrong. The foundations of the palace are also crumbling away. There's a lot of water seepage because it's on a lake. And crocodiles are starting to fill the basement, amongst other things. So it all gets complex. The Maharaja Chandra finds out about Sita and Harald's love affair. Well, there's not a consummated love affair, but their love for each other. They plan to escape Eschnapur. The Maharaja locks the whole place down. And they escape on horseback with the aid of a few friends. And try to cross a desert to get away, and the end of the first movie leaves our hero and his heroine in a desert. Their horses have died. There's a sandstorm, and their bodies are slowly being covered by the sandstorm as they've collapsed on a sand dune. That's the end of the first movie, so people had to wait a year for the second one. Fritz Lang's original plan was that the first movie is shown one night, and then people come back to the cinema the next night and see the second part of it. I can understand that didn't work for some reason, though it is something that had been done in previous decades, particularly in the 1920s in Germany and other parts of Europe. So in the second movie, they get rescued by a friendly caravan and hidden in a village. And the movie goes into how charitable people who have certain belief systems in India are. They're looking after people, and they look after Harald and Sita while they're recovering. Sita is captured by the Maharaja again, and unfortunately, Harald is captured by one of the people who's plotting against the Maharaja and kept in a dungeon in the basement of the palace. So you get a lot of this kind of swashbuckling thing. There are so many aspects to this film. The actual sense of the palace as a place and the areas under the palace as a place is masterfully done. It's a wonderful film for you knowing exactly where you are at every moment. You know which part of the dungeons you're in, you know which part of the palace you're in. Even though the interiors were shot in Germany and the production design does look pretty sumptuous. Fritz Lang's sense of place and sense of being able to move the audience's attention from one place to the other is magnificent in this. You get a scene where Harald is put in a pit and attacked by a man-eating tiger with only a spear to defend himself. And Fritz Lang ramps up the tension beautifully in this. He's one of the guys who really created cinema tension in the 1920s with the Dr. Mabuse movies and with Spione and with The Spiders. Just so many movies that Fritz Lang developed the grammar of suspense in cinema, and this pays off in this movie really well. But the bit that people remember most about these two films are the two exotic dances in the Hindu temple that Deborah Paget does. The first one, she's wearing bells and chains on her legs and is really sensual. But the second one, she's wearing an incredibly skimpy costume for the 1950s. And that's the one that people remember the most. That's actually from the second movie, The Indian Tomb, Das Indische Grabmal. The first movie is called The Tiger of Eschnapur. And Deborah Paget dancing very sensuously in these movies had to be an attraction for a certain demographic of the audience. Now, this is in German language. It's also shot in 1.37:1 aspect ratio, so it's not a widescreen movie. And at the time, the movie was very much criticised by the critics for being incredibly old-fashioned. It played like a sound version and colour version of a 1920s action film. It played like a John Hall and Maria Montez kind of exotic Arabian Nights movie from the 1940s. It was very much crazily old-fashioned at the time. And Fritz Lang knew this, but he wanted to make this story, and he wanted to try to get American audiences to accept German cinema. It didn't work out because the American producers grabbed these two 110-minute movies, cut them down to one 90-minute movie, dubbed them atrociously, changed the lead actor's name, and put them out very quickly. And of course, they didn't make any money at all, so Fritz Lang wasn't successful with that. The movie plays really old-fashioned, and it plays in a way that, well, I'll be honest, I've been playing a lot of the console game Skyrim, Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, which is a lot of dungeon bashing. And there are bits of this movie where you go, yeah, I can see how films like this influence people who make computer games, particularly Dungeons and Dragons type computer games. There's even a scene where Harold has got a sword, drops it and picks up a battle axe. And you go, yes, because that's exactly what you do when you're playing those kind of computer games. And the architecture of the dungeons is something that has influenced things since. It's influenced other movies, but it's also influenced computer games, and computer gamers who play those kind of dungeon crawler games are going to like this movie because there's a lot of it that's like that. There's also the exotic dancing. The goddess statue in the temple is crazy in this film. It really is something mind-blowing. The acting and the passion between the actors is kind of okay. Deborah Paget is quite good in it. She went on to be a born-again Christian for some reason. But we can remember for these movies, she was in Love Me Tender with Elvis as well. The two movies are something different. And now and then, after I've been watching a lot of English language cinema, particularly American and English cinema and Australian cinema, it's good to dive back into the history of other people's cinemas and diving into something where everybody knows the director's name. Fritz Lang is incredibly well known. But diving into obscurities of his, that even though they're not the best movies ever, they're good solid action films, but they're entertaining. And these two movies are good entertainment. I mean, you can laugh at the blue-eyed, dark-skinned people pretending to be people from South Asia, and yeah, again, that's problematic, but this is the 1950s. And the movie makers at least attempt to respect the culture and the belief systems of people from that part of the world more than a lot of other movies at the time. There's a lot of talk in the movie about the fact that India is a different culture than Germany. That kind of moral equivalence does make it a lot less racist than a lot of movies of its time. But if you get an opportunity to, you really should check out The Tiger of Eschnapur and The Indian Tomb if you get a chance to. If you like Fritz Lang movies, you're going to like this. If you like action films from the 1950s or the 1940s, you're going to like these as well. They are something quite unique, even though it was a remake of something previous. There's something unique and something wonderful about these films that isn't quite like any other movies that I know. Now, I mentioned Joe May, and I just finished watching The Tiger of Eschnapur and The Indian Tomb when Umbrella Entertainment sent me this. a triple feature of Universal Invisible Person movies that were sequels to The Invisible Man. And I watched The Invisible Man Returns last night, starring Vincent Price and Cedric Hardwicke. Joe May, who directed the first version of The Indian Tomb in 1921, made this movie in Hollywood in 1940. It's just weird how things link up when you're watching movies, and that one amused me. I'm going to do a review of this triple box set, by the way, because Umbrella Entertainment sent it to me. And the first one was a lot of fun. So I'm going to watch the other two and do a review of them as well. To get back to these ones, find them and give them a go. You're going to enjoy them. And I have a lot of friends who like 1940s and 1950s action cinema. And this is the kind of movie they're going to like. And that cultural difference of German cinema versus American or English cinema makes it kind of doubly exotic. You've got the exotic locations of India, of course. But you've also got the extra layer of exotic stuff because you're seeing India through a German lens, where we, for the most part, are Anglophone people living in totally different parts of the world. So it's a complex chain of interpretations of a story which originally came from Germany because a woman liked Indian culture. So that's it for this time around. I've got another video on Saturday, which is going to be a lot of fun. But thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know if you've seen these ones, or let me know what your favourite Fritz Lang movies are. And you can also support the channel by donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/paleocinema. And I also put some written movie reviews up on that site for the Patreon subscribers to enjoy. Anyway, look after yourself, stay safe, stay warm if you're down here, stay cool if you're up there. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Try to find some retro cinema from non-English language cinema cultures. And I'll catch you next time.